Today we've got three experts that are going to kind of give their insights on what makes compelling, engaging, and entertaining public speaking and emceeing. First we have Mike Adams on the panel with AgriTalk. We've got Max Armstrong with Farm Progress Companies and Ken Root with Iowa Agribusiness Radio. So each of our people will take a quick overview or bio on their experience and then kind of present some of the ways that they address audiences in their profession. Okay, guys.
All right, I guess I'll go first. It's a little intimidating to talk about this topic in front of a bunch of professional communicators. It reminds me when I go back and speak at my home church and see Sunday school teachers that I had sitting out in the congregation. I'm thinking, why am I up here telling them anything? They're my teachers. We're going to make a few comments here and then open it up for your questions. We're talking about speech giving and emceeing, and we'll touch upon both of them, but I think we all get the opportunities to do this, and I know many of you already have done this for many years, and I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to connect with audiences. They see you in person, they talk with you, a chance for you to expound upon some things maybe that you don't always get to on the air, so I think that's great. I think the key that I've found over the years is I try to learn from other speakers, but I don't try to necessarily copy them, because I got to be myself. You have to be yourself, and what works for us or somebody else may not necessarily work for you. I mean, over the years, growing up in this organization, I used to come here just to take notes of the legends in this organization, and I would pick up things when I'd leave NAFB. I remember growing up as a kid watching Ken Root speak, you know, and when I grow up, someday maybe, well, then I found out I don't want to do all the things Ken did, but you know, I always found I'd pick up some things, and it's changed a little bit over the years. The internet makes a lot of information more widely available. What I suggest is I keep a running file of speech material. Whenever I find anything, whether I've got a speech schedule coming up or not, I put it away. I think that's something I might be able to use somewhere along the line. Hang on to it. And Dick Sarker was a great source of material. He was always sending out emails. I'm going to touch just a moment on emceeing, which is something that I really enjoy doing. I think when you emcee, you're the traffic cop, you're the band leader, so to speak. You set a tone for a meeting. You want to keep it moving. You want to keep it under control. I just emceed a dairy meeting last week, and they called me the moderator, and I said, well, based on what we saw in the debates, I guess I've been wrong about the role of moderator. Evidently, the role of the moderator has changed over the years. Now it's lose control of your event, be completely ignored by the speakers, and inappropriately interject your own political personal views into things. So, but really, that's not the point. I think I like to use some humor. The main thing I like to, whether I'm speaking or emceeing, is what I call a radar. Have a radar of what's going on in the crowd and in the room. You know, if you're speaking and something happens, somebody drops a tray of dishes or something, you know, some say, well, ignore that and go on. Well, you can't ignore the elephant in the room. You know, if something happens and everybody's aware of it, I like to, you know, refer to it and then move on, because everybody's thinking about it. They're distracted by it. I emceed a Queen pageant one time where the contestant, you know, they had to give a minute speech, and this girl didn't even realize what she was doing. She was so nervous about hitting the time, she wound up going, just like, you know, like they put the tag on these commercials now. She was so fat. Well, everybody in the whole room was aware of what she was doing but her. So when she was done, I had to come back and say contestant number 52 from Sangamon County or whatever. So I just went, hey, contestant number 52 is Sangamon County, you know, like that. And of course the place went nuts, because everybody was thinking that. Of course, the girl had no idea what we were all laughing about, so I made sure later that she wasn't hurt by that. But it's amazing, if everybody's thinking something in a room, don't ignore it. I mean, refer to it and go on. The other thing is kind of, if you're going in to give a speech somewhere, it's an area you're not familiar with, find out ahead of time, is there anything sensitive in that area, any topics that you ought to be careful of and maybe avoid. Unless you can and you don't mind getting in trouble, you know, you go ahead and do it. I gave a speech to the conservation districts one time in San Diego and used a joke that had Native Americans in it. It wasn't anything against Native Americans, just they were in the story. The crowd loved it. But I noticed an uneasiness up on the head table, and later found out they come up to me and say, well, we just had these long negotiations with Native Americans over some conservation issues, and they're really touchy about these things. And I use that in my joke. So that taught me a lesson there to be careful. The other thing I do, and I'm going to pass it on to Max here, is I find somebody in the audience that I can pick on. If you know them, that's great. If not, you kind of get there and you get to know them a little bit ahead of time. And something about calling somebody out, you make them the local celebrity. Because afterwards you'll hear people say, oh, wow, he really picked on you, didn't he? And that makes him feel good or her feel good. Actually, in Illinois, this happened, because I like to kid people, make fun of people. I actually had people coming up to me before banquets and before speeches saying, will you make fun of me? They wanted me to make fun of them because it gave them some attention and they liked it, and it was in good fun. So we'll get into some other things. I know, like timing and what to charge and things like that, but those are just some thoughts I had, Mike.
Yeah, great, Mike. I appreciate it. I would just echo your comment there about there's so many reasons to do this. There's so many reasons to try to utilize this opportunity to be a meeting speaker, not the least of which is you can enhance your income, certainly. But above and beyond that, it puts you out with the producers or with the key consumer audience far more than you would be otherwise. You're out there interacting with them, you're standing around after the meeting, you're hearing what they have to say, you're studying in advance what their issues might be, and that brings you up to speed a little bit on another segment of the agriculture community. Above and beyond that, you're probably getting program content. You surely packed your recorder when you went out there. You're going to do an interview, you're going to bring it back, they're going to hear it on the air. That will remind other groups that their story may be on the air also if they bring you out as a speaker. Remember that you're bringing value to that meeting. You're helping bring that crowd to that meeting. That's why they're bringing you in. And that's also another reason to remember to charge something for what you do. There needs to be a fee for that. Expect the unexpected, as Mike said. There will be that tray of dishes that hits the floor sometime. There may be a medical emergency in that room. I was about 3/4 of the way through my presentation. It must have been about 2 years ago, and I was just really getting down to the nitty-gritty. I was moving. I was hot. I was getting ready to go in for that final slug. The fire alarm in the hotel went off. The fire alarm in the hotel out in the hallway, but you could hear it. It was very audible in the room. I looked around that room, and for some reason, in that particular audience, there were no fewer than 3 people in wheelchairs. Now, the thought crossed my mind, all right, yeah, some kid may have punched that alarm out there. But it could also be the real thing. And serving on the board of fire commissioners in the western suburbs of Chicago, I knew it wouldn't be a wise deal to ignore that fire alarm. I quickly wrapped up the presentation and said, I think we should head to the hallway. Well, the trucks were rolling out. There was no valid fire, but that meeting was over. I was the final speaker. Everything had preceded it. There was no opportunity to go ahead. You will have things like that. The unexpected come up. You make the best of the situation. Obviously, you try to wrap it in any way you can, but personal safety, obviously, is a priority. I guess one other thing I would add before passing it over to Ken, do you have the time to properly prepare for this? In your schedule, with everything else that's going on, do you have the time to go into that meeting prepared with what you want to say? Do you know all of the points you want to cover? Have you committed to memory? And I say committed to memory. It's far, far better to get in front of a group without a speech written in front of you. You may have written it initially, you may have put down some bullet points, but you come across with extremely more credibility. If you can look that audience in the eye, if you can continue to look them in the eye, if you don't have to have a podium in front of you, you've got a hand, a mic, and from the head and from the heart, that whole presentation is laid right out in front of them over that period of 20, 25, 30, well, maybe 45 minutes. Do you have the time to prepare like that? Because if you do, you'll go into that situation far more confident of what you're going to be doing in front of that group. Your performance will be better if you have prepared. So preparation, I think, is absolutely essential. The only other thing I would say is, there's no reason to ever go blue in front of an audience. No excuse for it whatsoever. If you're going to be sharing the joke at the bar, that's fine. Or with your buddies in town, that's fine. In front of an audience, you should be perfectly comfortable saying the same thing from the pulpit in the church, or in front of your mom, but no one should ever be embarrassed. I went to a meeting, I spoke at a meeting last winter, and I wondered why they were grilling me about my presentation, what I was going to be talking about. Out in Scottsdale, they brought together their dealers from all over the United States. I found out that the year before, the guy who had stood on the same platform in the same session I had was escorted off the stage. The president of the company had to come up and apologize to his dealers from all over the United States because the speaker they had brought in was getting raunchy.
It's Ken Root.
Like I said, there's no reason to ever be profane, obscene, or to make your audience uncomfortable that way. So that's just something I would stress in that regard. We'll share some more comments, but now, Mr. Root, explain why you did that.
Thank you, Max. Well, as you can hear from them, Max is articulate and authoritative, and Mike is kind of pure and pleasant, and apparently I have been appointed to be adversarial and offensive.
Go with your strengths.
I love this. I love this hotel. I don't know how many of you have stayed here multiple years, but sometimes in this hotel you really don't feel like you ever can be alone. I would advise you to make sure that you close the door of your bathroom, because just like yesterday, I was standing there shaving and looked back and there were 7 fat people behind me naked. Now, my point is that most of the things I say, people don't get it, and they're not fun. My challenge with my speaking career has been that I do not like reputation, and I get bored. And it probably has led me to more grief, and Lynn Henderson to some grief, and other people to some grief who have been my employer from time to time. But I place myself in a personally precarious position, and that seems to be the most entertaining thing I do for an audience. I did that for 7 years with Agriculture. And I am not as good as Orion, or Max, or Mike, or several of the rest of you. And so my game is a different one than that. I don't advise you to copy it, but I do have fun with the things I do and how I go about it. I try not to be blue, but I respect that, and I think there are things that are obviously offensive. But I seem to have people who, from the first speeches I gave, were offended by my tone, which may make you wish to, sample the waters before you dive into them and maybe not do this. But on the other hand, I like to be entertained by what's going on around me and the things that are going on. So I'll leave it at that until you ask questions. I would give you a few comments here that I think are kind of basic to speaking, and that is that when you're on the radio or television, don't give your jokes, don't give your speech material. Mark Pearson, rest his soul, respects Orion greatly. You knew that. But his favorite joke was when he was 18, he went to Orion giving a speech. And it was about the House, the agriculture bill. And he gives it, of course, in Orion voice. And then he said, 20 years later, after he had been convinced this was the business he should go into, he said he went to another speech that Orion gave about the House, that agriculture bill. And he went to Orion afterwards and he said, "Hey, Orion, that's the same speech I heard when I was in high school." And supposedly Orion said, "That's right, Mark. It's a lot easier to change audiences than change speeches." He got a lot of miles out of that. A lot of miles. I would say just a couple more things, and one of them Max hit on, and that is never let your ego truly dominate you while you're speaking. You're not that important as a person while you're up there. You're an entertainer in many ways. And I'll relate this story to you. I was speaking at the Community Bankers Association in Las Vegas. Big speech, brought me in, great day. Alan Greenspan was to speak later on that day. Alan Greenspan had a cold, which at the time he was head of the Federal Reserve was a big deal. And he couldn't attend. But he loved the community bankers so much that he decided he would be on by satellite. Well, the morning program moved along, and I noticed the people were getting more nervous all the time that were running it. There was an astronaut who'd been on the space station for 6 months, and he talked about it in real time. It took him a long time to tell his speech. And so when they came to me, there was about 10 minutes left before Greenspan was to be there. The guy who got up to introduce me did about a 6 or 7 minute introduction. Probably the longest, most flowery introduction I've ever gotten. And so I stand up. I've got a teleprompter, but I'm doing things off my head and a couple of notes, and I begin to talk. And I get one story out, I get one response from the audience, and this little message comes up, and it said, "Please end your speech now. Mr. Greenspan is ready to go." So I started figuring out, how do you get out of a 30-minute speech, 4 minutes into it? And as I'm trying to get out of it, they switched the prompter to where I'm looking. I'm the only one in the room looking at this old man who's sitting there, inaudibly going, and I said, "Thank you very much." And I walked away. That was the end of it. And they paid me the full amount. Everything was fine. But truly, they were there to see him. He was up. They knew it. And so, short of Clinton and the teleprompter being shut off on him in 1988, that is the way it is. You just have to simply go with it and move on from that. We'll talk about Emceeing maybe a little bit more. He'll ask you a little bit later on. We'll talk about pricing. We'll talk about a number of things and how not to kill yourself, committing to a speech.
I would add just a couple other things. Unless you're speaking to a group of 10 people, get there and find out about their PA system. Make sure you've got a good PA system.
Stress that, as a matter of fact, when you're booked.
Yeah. So you don't have to scream and yell through a whole presentation because you're not going to be comfortable and they're not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be very good at all. If you think you'll ever go back and give a speech at the same place again, I would suggest write down a few notes about what jokes did I use, what points did I make, because if you come back there, right now I'm doing some where I go back several years consecutively, and I'm always going, what did I say last year?
I've never had that problem.
You never asked back, that's why. And I would say on length, a lot of times they'll tell you how long they want you to talk. I don't think anybody's ever been unhappy with a really short speech.
Except the people that paid.
Right. Now I had one here, I spoke to the Illinois bankers here this summer, and they wanted an hour presentation. I'm thinking, how am I going to talk for an hour? And it turns out I wound up trying to cut mine down. Even after an hour, I didn't think I would do that. But find out what length of time they want you to speak.
You mentioned jokes, and Ken, you talked about entertaining. I would simply say if stand-up comedy isn't your thing and you don't feel comfortable telling jokes, don't feel like you have to. Now, don't get me wrong, they want you to be pleasant. They don't want you beating them over the head and leaving people depressed. Jeepers. You guys remember as well as I do, in Big O, going to meetings in the early 80s, all the way there in the car, you're thinking, what can I possibly say to lift spirits, to be inspirational, to leave these folks upbeat as they're leaving the room? And you guys did. You found a way to do it. And they want you to be pleasant for an after-dinner meal, but if you're going to use comedy, use it appropriately. Just to pull a joke out of your hat for the sake of having a joke, I'm not sure well serves your cause or theirs. But as these guys have pointed out, you can pick up on things. Find out a little bit about the audience, find a way to, something maybe that's been going on in sports in that community. Everybody loves a joke about sports. You've got a forever losing team that is professional that they're following. Find out the matters of the heart in that community, something that might really strike a chord there, that you can leave an inspirational message with them, a quote that you can wrap up your presentation with in some way. Valuable statistics. What I love is when I look at my audience and they're writing stuff down. They're pulling out a piece of paper or a pen and they're writing down the statistic that I've shared.
Never saw that either. Never saw that.
Actually, it's usually somebody trying to use it in their speech. But those are just some things that come to mind.
If you've got a signature joke or a signature story, You know, you can get a lot of miles out of that. Tom Stever told a joke, an old Lena joke, back when he had a meeting in Sioux Falls. What year? 70-something? 80? 85? I turned that into a story about Fred and Marthy and dynamiting the outhouse. And I still have that as the joke that always people remember. And they almost expect you to tell it. In fact, I was speaking in front of a almost Amish group a couple of years ago, and I didn't tell it. And at the end, the guy who hired me, he said, we want to hear the outhouse joke. So I went back and told it. That's all he came for, this one.
Questions? Lisa?
Professional organizations or online tools can help folks that want to refine their public speaking. What would you suggest?
Go to YouTube. There are a lot of great speeches on YouTube, as a matter of fact, and if you can identify someone. I think, one thing that helped me was growing up in a church, we had some excellent ministers, as a matter of fact. As I was growing up, I watched these guys who were very good pulpit ministers, and there's just a lot of good places where you can find things on the internet as well. I don't know if you guys have any additional guidance on that, but I found stuff on YouTube. I sit there and think, wow, that's a great idea. I'm not sure I can copy it, I'm not sure I can replicate it, but maybe I can steal something, a little tidbit from it.
Style, I would say, is the one thing I look for. Dr. Lowell Catlett, he's got the wingspan of Michael Jordan. He can make himself really ugly and things of that nature, and you see if you want to move in the direction of some of those type of people, or others who have a certain on-stage demeanor that is so clear-cut and entertaining just to watch them. I think those sort of things help. You've got to get out of yourself. In my view, when you're a speaker, you're like you're an entertainer, or you're a mascot, or you're a clown. You need to get into character, I think, at that moment. Move yourself into that character. Ray Wilkinson, remember the people have seen Ray Wilkinson speak? Ray had like 4,000 jokes, all short, Leonard and Cecil jokes. And he would move into this character. In fact, Ray was turned away from being an officer of NAFB at one time because he would come here and tell those jokes. Ray was one of the smartest, best business people you probably ever meet, but because he had that character going all the time, people didn't take him seriously. So he didn't know when to turn it off and when to turn it on.
He was very, very good. The only other thing I would add to that is Ray was extremely good with those stories from the podium. I loved him to death. I miss him to this day. When I listen to those same stories on tape, they didn't work. They just didn't quite click as much as having it as a presentation, which says something about the power of the podium that you'll have when you're behind it, and how you can really bring things to life that, you know what, you can't do that on a radio. And so that gives you we talk so much about platforms. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, radio. Hey, there's one more. And guess what? You can cross-promote across those platforms. Tweet about what's going to be on your show, put it on Facebook after you've been there, and while you're at the podium, promote the whole shooting match.
I would say as well, again, I'm always looking at a speaker and just trying to get an idea from them, something I might incorporate into what I do and how I would present it. I think creating a comfort, where they, you feel like you're kind of in control of the situation. Whether you're speaking for those 10, 15, 20 minutes, that's your time, or you're emceeing, you're controlling the flow of the event, and make people, feel at ease. They've asked you to MC your event, you want them to say you made it flow well, you may engage people. I like to engage the audience. I like to do things with them, and they feel part of the presentation that way. I think that's important. But every audience is different, and some audiences you might feel like you're talking to a wall, and other audiences, they're laughing just when you stand up, and all right, I can't wait for this one, So you're going to have to
beware of the social hour.
That's right. Yeah. Are you speaking before lunch? That's another thing. They're ready to get out of there, or right after lunch.
There's a certain length of social hour that's not bad, and then it can go to.
These two guys are exceptionally good MCs, and I really think if I never gave another speech in my life, I'd be happy. But I love to MC. My reasoning is I've engaged, and I learn things. And sometimes as a speaker, especially if you're one who has a rote speech, you want to arrive just before your speech, and you want to start your truck before you start it and leave immediately thereafter. And I like to go into it, again, with that same abandon that I seem to have perfected, and get myself in a situation where I don't know what's happening next, but neither does the audience. And they are expecting something to come out of this. And in many cases, you pull out something that is amazing. In other cases, you die. But we had one several years ago with Mr. Berkland. And it was an Alpha Gamma Rho event. Al Johnson was there. And just out of the blue, I had him on a panel, and I said, tell us about the grain embargo. And so he started through it, and in a minute, we realized he was telling us things that he apparently had wanted to say for a long time. And he said, if we had, the grain embargo was wrong, and if we had left the Soviets alone, the World Trade Towers would still be standing. Woo! But had we not risked it like we had and placed ourselves in a position where we could have died, we wouldn't have succeeded at that level either.
I would simply add that just to stress the differences in style, I don't leave a meeting quickly after I'm done. I'm often one of the last out the door, and part of that is I'm learning a lot more before I get out of there. You know, I lament the fact sometimes my vehicle is almost the last one to leave, and so does my wife sometimes, as a matter of fact, that I don't know when to stop visiting with folks. But the additional insight that you gain about what's going on with that association or those farmers in that community, you know, that's another good reason to go out and speak as often as you can. Just a little bit about moderating too, and I see Mr. Opple back there. He gets a workout, you know, on television, and it's a juggling act, as these guys would agree. You've got to involve everybody, but it is fun moderating a panel. You need to make sure if somebody's not getting questions that they get a question. You need to make sure you have additional questions going into that. I moderated a thing out in Washington, D.C. in it was presidential election year, when Daddy Bush was vice president, was running for the presidency. Michael Dukakis was the Democrat. Jesse Jackson was an active participant. He had declared his candidacy. At that particular session, President Bush was there, showed up, he was on time. Dukakis did not show. Jesse was not on time. And he wasn't on time, and he wasn't on time. I kept looking down at the Secret Service agent who gave me a 5-minute signal, and a little bit later he gave me a 10-minute signal, and a little bit later he threw up his hands. And there were 21 cameras across the platform, and a room sitting there that needed to hear something. And you just have to find a way to make sure that you've got enough material. And it doesn't have to be comedy, but you've got enough to involve the group and at least keep something going if something goes wrong. And I think the reason that the broadcasters and you folks will be called upon time after time after time to do what you do, in addition to the fact that you communicate well and you make it lively and interesting, you know how to read a watch. And meeting planners love that. Seriously. If you know how to wrap it up on time, especially in a panel discussion, it makes all the difference in the world.
Which is a good point, because I go on the air in 4 minutes, so I'm going to have to bail out. The other thing I would say is, you know, enjoy yourself when you're speaking, and if you don't enjoy it, it's going to come across. I think we all, with different styles, but enjoy what we do, and that will come across in your presentation. I love the energy of an audience, and when you're up there, it's different when you're on the radio and you can't see who you're talking to. Yeah, that immediate feedback, and you play off that. You'll see faces out there, and you'll see people, if they're shaking their heads, you know, well, that's one reaction, or if they're laughing or whatever, and you hope they laugh at the right times. But watch your audience, use your audience, get energy from that audience. I think that's important in your presentation.
You better run it. I know that show.
I
I would, Mark.
Just a comment, or if you would, on subject. This we're talking about speech giving now and not emceeing. If you're appearing before the Soil Conservation Service or a dairy,
Thanks, Will. Appreciate you being here.
or a beef organization, and you're talking to people who know more about the subject than you do. I mean, they live it. That's what their occupation and careers are. How deep do you get into that, into your presentation? to make it topical for your group, but also, I guess, how do you structure your speeches, if you're in front of a beef group and you know that these are the leaders of the industry, but you want to be topical? How do you address that?
I think you can put it in terms of the whole agriculture picture. Obviously, yes, they are expert about what's happening in the beef industry, and they may know every element of it, but are they as expert in seeing how that fits in with the puzzle with pork producers, with the grain industry? Is there an overall view that you can bring to them relative to what's happening in government affairs, what's happening with consumers, so that they kind of understand their place with what's going on? And I guess I would also say it's probably kind of unusual that everybody in that beef audience is expert on marketing or governmental affairs or whatever. I think it's always good, as Mike pointed out a few minutes ago, to acknowledge somebody in that audience. And let's say you have a national board member sitting out there. You can say, well, as John has pointed out so many times, as he's called on lawmakers in Washington, and as he has so well represented your group in front of those lawmakers, you know, this is going on out there that needs to be tackled, and you share that with the rest of the audience that way. Put it in perspective. I don't know how you...
Well, I like to realize, no matter what I'm doing, that there's somebody that knows more about it than I do. And I like to look for those issues that people are up to date on and maybe have a little edge to them, and get those in front of them if you're talking real issues like that. And make it where that they can have an opinion, they can engage, and they may, you know, contact you later and give you more information. A great source sometimes, you know. A person also, you know, a person will say, well, why don't you come to my ranch? Why don't you come to my farm? They don't want to really say it in front of the group, but you can learn a great deal from this. So it's always an information collecting thing. Let me switch gears for just a second with you and tell you that when I give a speech, I always become very nervous, even to the point that I'm cold up here and may need to hug backs to get warmer.
Now I'm getting nervous.
I find that there's no filter, and I think a lot of people have to get over that. So I want to talk to you about what you could do if you want to be a speaker. The best way to give a speech is not to put your soul out there on the line, but is to talk about something that you have reference to. Jack Crowner used to travel and take slides, and then he would take a slide projector and he would head across Kentucky showing slides. There's a couple of good things for that. Number one, it gives you a position of being authoritative about something that other people might want to know. And secondly, there's nothing better as a prompter than a slide projector or PowerPoint, because you run those things one after the other. You can change what you say, but you know what's coming next. So if you want to be a speaker, I think the first thing is you have to have some message to deliver. So if you went on a trip with a young leaders group, if you've been to a tour anywhere that you have documented that, you can offer that to a group locally or beyond that and be able to speak in that manner. That gives you a way to not have to be reliant upon your skills as a joke teller or be authoritative in some other area that has to do with your specific audience. Another thing is charging. How do you charge? I went to work for Russell Pearson. Russell Pearson got as conservative as anybody I ever met. One of the people that we follow, that many of you know him, is Monty Reese. Monty worked for Russell before I worked there. And the old joke was Monty believed in free speech, and he would go anywhere and give one. And as a result of that, he ruined the speaking market while he was in Oklahoma. But as soon as Monty left, Russell, upon my request, started saying, well, let's charge these people X number of dollars. I think at the time it was $75, to come out and speak. Orion gave us this information back in the early 80s. If you increase the price of your speech, you'll increase the number of speeches. Is that accurate? That people think you're better if you charge more. And if you come from further, and if you fly in an airplane, and you really are selling the fizz of this whole thing. But I have 3 different levels of pricing. I'd love to know Max's point of view here. If it's local, I will charge the lowest amount. If it's within state, it's a larger amount. And if it's nationwide, it's larger than that. And if you ever have a bureau that you're dealing with, they get a percentage of this. So the more you charge, the more they make.
Yeah, just in regard to price, I guess my personal thing is I do it by what kind of an organization it is. I do a free speech every year for an FFA chapter. Just as a matter of course, if the first FFA chapter that contacts me each year, I just go out there and do it. I just think it's a way I give back. It's something I like to do. It keeps me out with kids. But then it depends on whether or not it's a county farm bureau cattlemen's group. You know, if it's an association, a local association, I look at it differently than a commercial enterprise. If it's a bank, stick it to them. They got the money. Farm equipment dealership, do it too. Are we to wrap here, Lisa? Are we getting close to the time?
4 minutes.
How about another question? I'm sorry, Lisa.
Well, I was just going to ask, I'm curious, who would you consider to be tremendous orators? Who is someone that you try to emulate yourself in real life?
Well,
Yeah.
what do you think? Jesse's been 10 feet from his for 3 decades.
Who else in the industry or other industries that you constantly go back to refer as you're trying to enhance your own skills?
Yeah, that's a great question. Gosh.
Max likes himself so much, he had a hard time getting past Orient.
That is a real good question, and I think, again, I think of, the Reverend Billy Graham in his heyday. It's hard to not get caught up, I think, in his message as he delivered it. And people from all walks of faith, I think, found him inspirational. Certainly there are others, I can't think. Scott McCain is a guy that many of us know. He was a national FFA officer, grew up in Indiana. He does inspirational speaking all around the world. He's very, very good. Mr. Rowe, Dirty Jobs. Some of you interviewed him after he was at the FFA convention. He really delivered the message and left an impression on kids of all ages in that audience.
Let me drop one more area in that I think is very important. When you commit to give a speech, I've always felt like I had to go give that speech. I have come very close to killing myself a couple of 3 times in an airplane doing that. Iced over, stupid things, but I was going to get there. And I really think we have to use some judgment involved in this. And sometimes, especially in the wintertime in the Midwest, you're going to get caught. And I don't know how others of you deal with that, but I think that we've had some farm broadcasters die in the process of trying to fulfill a commitment of that type. But on the other hand, you should take it seriously, and you should make sure if you say you're going to be there, that you can be counted upon to do so.
Some speakers' bureaus may emphasize that you need to be in that town so many hours ahead of your presentation. And, they're counting on you. There's no doubt about that. So, as I said earlier, do you have the time to do it? To properly prepare, to properly get there, so you're not putting your life on the line.
And then I like to go through a little method in my mind, and I'm not the first to come up with this, but here it is. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them. Tell them what you told them. Or stand up, speak up, and shut up.
KISS, keep it short, stupid. Never that joke.
That wasn't considered a joke when they told it to me.
That's why they didn't laugh when I said it.
But have you ever wrestled anybody while you were speaking?
No.
We had an event, again, it's spontaneous here. We had an event one time with Ag Chem Equipment Company, and Jesse Ventura, Lynn's shaking his head going, I should have never hired him. Jesse Ventura was supposed to be there when he was governor of Minnesota, and at the last minute he pulled out. And their guy, his head of communications, probably had done some drugs in his life. And he said, Ken, if I get you a skull cap and a boa, will you come out? And so I did. And there was a guy in the front row who was cued to jump up and say, you're a fake. And I got him up on stage and wrestled him. And then he won, and I hit him in the back of the head with a chair and knocked him off the stage. The bad part of all this was we had gotten so excited about this whole thing, I couldn't breathe. And so for the next 5 minutes, I began this speech with no air. Actually, the speech was fairly good, but no one ever remembered it.
So one more question. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had one. When I attend an event, the most common mistake that I see MCs making is to abandon the podium. They walk away when they're done speaking without somebody coming up and guard the podium is a rule that people seem to forget.
Now, do you mean by losing continuity of the meeting?
No, no, no. It's just that people are focused on, when somebody's at the podium, everything's in control. But if the previous speaker walks away and the overall MC or the host doesn't come forward, the podium is empty.
Yeah, the moderator needs to be close by, ready to get up there. The other thing I would say about moderating a panel or emceeing, make sure you have the rules set up front with your participants of that panel that there is a time limit. And that you will probably get kind of close to the podium and make them uncomfortable when they're getting close to the time limit so that you can get it done on time. Otherwise, program participants don't have enough time, right, Lisa?